Thank you so much for being with us today, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Akiko. Morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. Honestly, it's a real honour to be with you all, and I'm just so sorry that we can't be together in person. I joined the NSUN AGM last year in a really rainy York, and the love, connection, courage, tenacity I witnessed flourishing across the NSUN community has truly stayed with me. And what a different era we find ourselves in. But first of all, before I begin, I wanted to ground ourselves in this very moment to acknowledge and embrace the personal and collective loss and suffering many of us have experienced and continue to experience. I've lost 3 loved ones to COVID, and I know there will be many of you in the space today who've also suffered many forms of loss during this time. But I also wanted to honour the incredible community space that NSUN have created today, albeit virtually, full of members working tirelessly to support communities across England. But I also see welcome to so many participants from around the world. But, you know, it's just been inspiring to witness the work that many of you are doing to navigate the uncertainty, the complexity, and the suffering that continues to impact so many. But I think more than anything that we've realised is that this pandemic has impacted every member of society, but it's also surfaced the pre-existing inequalities and many communities faced prior to the pandemic. It's also exacerbated social injustices and trends that were already there, from racial inequalities, rising hunger and poverty, homelessness, loneliness, and isolation. At the same time, there's an increase in mental health distress and trauma. Tomorrow, the UK government is set to announce their spending review, and the Chancellor will announce a £500 million package to support mental health services in England after increased demand for support during the pandemic. But majority of that funding is set to be allocated to various services for young people in schools, but also to support NHS workers, and that support is vital. But at the same time, the broader social sector across the UK and arguably around the world is increasing its conversations around renewal and recovery in a post-COVID world, and talking about building back better. In the UK, following Danny Kruger's MP's report, Levelling Up Communities, it was noted that to build back better, we need a new economic and social model to replace the one that preceded the crisis. Because before the crisis hit, our communities were in trouble. So really today, what I just wanted to do with the short time that I have is just to highlight the urgent and pressing need to focus on the vital role that lived experience leadership plays in this debate, but all future efforts. Leadership that will be needed to create and sustain efforts that will truly change society for the better, because the status quo won't do. And currently there are many well-intentioned efforts and solutions out there, but often they don't address the root causes of injustice or the growing health crisis. Often they miss the point that health outcomes for many communities are deeply intertwined and connected with distinct social, structural and cultural stresses and inequities, that treating communities as homogenous groups and defining them as solely by their collective struggles and injuries just will no longer do. And often at best, these efforts are uninspiring, but in some cases harmful. And so what we urgently need is not a tokenistic approach to community engagement, co-production or social action. If more than anything, this pandemic has shown us that the power of local communities to act during crisis, where many people with power were paralysed by unfolding events, truly needs to be invested in. And today, more than ever, we need activists, change makers, social leaders who have a deep-rooted understanding of the issues, challenges, and problems that our communities face. Not simply leaders who analyse data or negotiate around power tables or research problems that civil society face. That work is all very important, but our society demands the leadership of people who have a richer and deeper understanding of the problems their communities are facing, but they also need the means, resources and agency to craft the solution to those problems. Over the last several months, I've had the honour of working with incredible community leaders, activists and change makers who are activating their lived experience for change. And when I talk about lived experience, it's people with direct first-hand experience of the social issues or injustices they are addressing in their social purpose work. They're service designers, activists, artists, entrepreneurs, survivors, innovators, policy strategists, often people who are activating and integrating a lived, learned and practiced experience to innovate and repurpose their work to address the challenges of the pandemic and more, to really serve the communities that they share those experiences with. But those change makers urgently need resources to scale their work to meet the ongoing needs of their communities in this fast evolving world that we're living in. Often these change makers and activists are systematically stereotyped, often feared or dismissed, and often seen as a risky bet for a solution design and resource. And I've been working with many funders to try and hold them to account, to start to think about how money needs to be invested in those communities and with those leaders. And there's been several funds that we've been engaged with, but today, and I'm really mindful of the time that I have, I wanted to take this moment to share my experience of being on a panel for the NSUN COVID-19 Fund, which was open to address the disproportionate impact of COVID, but I was asked to be part of an incredible group for the fund that was then set in place to support Black, Brown and other ethnic communities who were creating change, and NSUN members. I spent a few days with an incredible group, and a huge shout out to Kiko, Zoe Bennett, if you're with us, and Alison Faulkner. And I think they will all agree that those hours that we spent together were truly humbling, inspiring and uplifting. The applications were absolutely exceptional. The sophisticated simplicity and innovative approaches being crafted and spearheaded by communities and NSUN members with very little resources was nothing less than inspiring. Members who were integrating their lived, learned and practiced experience to address the needs of their communities despite the most harshest, uncertain and unstable situations. And I think you will be hearing from two incredible organisations that were funded, including Taraki and Adira later on in the AGM. I just wanted to share my takeaways from that work and also all the other initiatives our centre has been involved with coalitions and networks of lived experience leaders. And what I found was, the first thing was that lived experience leaders, change makers, activists, survivors have not only the experience, but also the relationships and knowledge that is essential for developing solutions to address the needs of the communities they represent and serve. There was the applications often seemed very simple, but the deep connection to community can often be overlooked and often ignored. The depth and richness of the cultural, structural and systemic challenges and the understanding of those we're just singing across those applications, but also the ability to recognise and leverage the assets and human potential within the communities, which also could be felt in those applications, but also the power of human dignity, respect and connection needed to support those communities was also singing from those pages and applications. And you could see that organisations, community groups were striving to ensure that everyone that they worked with had agency, and the belief that they had that the people that they serve and the communities they work with can lead change in their own future relationships and environment. but also the tenacity and courage and sense of possibility, that no matter how challenging the times were that the applicants were finding themselves in, that they felt that they could do better, and they just needed to invest in the people that they were walking alongside, regardless of the odds that were stacked against them. And most of all, they were all leading with deep humility and rooted in humanity. And it's that I wanted to share, that together, it's these approaches that will form the foundation for achieving transformational change that we need. And I know that there are often words and language that we're getting caught up in, and especially the social sector, you know, a co-option often of words such as lived experience, grassroots organisations, service user involvement, community action, and we could go on. But when we talk about lived experience leadership, it's just one single simple thing, that human history has shown us that people at the hard edge of social injustice have always been the pioneers of change. And the notion of lived experience in the social good ecosystem was founded by our forefathers and foremothers in the disability rights movement. This work has been progressed significantly by colleagues, our brothers and sisters, working across the mental health space. And although history has illuminated the power of lived experience, civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, and many more that have highlighted that, there are leaders right now, change makers, survivors, crafting solutions and services, products, activities, and much, much more to improve the lives of the people and communities they share experiences with. But also leaders with lived experience who are working in academia. I have for many, many years been inspired by the work of many NSUN members, but also, for example, work of Alison Faulkner, Peter Beresford, and also who are part of the Survivors Research Network. I've also had the honour of working with incredible academics at Yale University who are also activating their lived experience of mental health or mental distress and other intersectional social injustice issues to craft really truly innovative, community-based, asset-based projects to work closely with the communities that who have lived experience to develop solutions that are embedded in communities. I also wanted to share a little bit about the beauty that we've also seen with the Challenge and Change Fund that we co-designed with the Blagrave Trust. It was a fund that we created at speed alongside other funds such as Resourcing Racial Justice and the Phoenix Fund. But the Challenge and Change Fund was for young activists, campaigners, often with lived experience, who are working on intersectional social justice issues. Many of them innovating in ways that we just could not ignore, with fearless energy and dynamism in this fast evolving world. And we were just struck by young activists who were also working on the intersect of mental health, health injustice, with the intersect of racial justice, you know, trans people working on incredible projects, young people who've had experience of the criminal justice system, and much, much more. And honestly, what was so compelling about their work was that they also want to learn from elders, you know, those leaders with lived experience, activists and survivors who have gone before them, to help them understand about where things have worked well in the past and where mistakes have been made, but not only in movements, but also in policy design. So I just wanted to end by saying, we've always been here, we are here now, and we will always be here in the future. And what we need to do to really demand the resource that is crucial to innovate and create the solutions that we need, that our communities are demanding and urgently need. We need to start to come together as a collective. And that's the very reason we founded the Lived Experience Leaders movement, where are working across social issue and injustice issue areas. And it's only when we have come together that we can elevate the collective power of so many. And the movement is unconstituted and it's there for everybody. And I hope many of you will join us to just come together to share experiences, to share expertise, and it's a movement led by and for people activating their lived experience. What I will do is by simply ending, because I know that time is nearly up and you've got incredible and important issues to discuss, share and connect on over the next few days. I just wanted to end by saying I appreciate you all, and I share my gratitude for all the work that NSUN members do. I'm constantly inspired by the work that you are, and your courage, and everything that you do for the communities that you represent and serve. Thank you so much.
Baljeet, thank you so much. That was amazing. The comments are fizzing. You know, congratulations, brilliant, awesome stuff. So I could have spent all the time reading those. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a couple of questions. I'm not sure how many we'll be able to get through, but if that's all right with you. So the first question is, how best can we influence the big funders out there, many of whom do not seem interested in small groups or small organizations?
So I would start by saying that we need to, and this is why I ended on the issue around elevation and connection. And this is why NSUN and networks and umbrella associations, but also movements are so important, because sadly, often people will not talk about organizations, community groups that they don't know. And often they will not elevate organisations that they don't know little about. But I'm also not going to shy away from the fact that power dynamics mean that there are many who hold power who are also trying to survive and have relevancy for their work and their organisations. So that's why we have to elevate each other. And that's why the work of NSUN, for example, of elevating the work, the projects, the blogs, not only the stories, but the work that you are all doing is absolutely vital. And we have to come together to elevate that work. And also we have to realise that we are not just merely our stories. The leaders and activists we have in our movement also we are not just an othering that we're asking for in terms of lived experience leadership. We are often integrating learned and practice expertise. As I mentioned, we're academics, policy strategists. We have with service designers, entrepreneurs, and I think it's that when we start to integrate all of that together and we start to elevate the innovation that we're doing, is that we're going to be finally listened to. And that's where we need to focus on that elevation and collective power, because we can talk about each other and celebrate each other, and then they can't ignore us.
Thank you so much. And I'm just going to pause here again to read a few more comments. You're a star, Baljeet. Thank you so much. Thank you, Baljeet. That was amazing. Elevating each other is so important, especially in these challenging and painful times. Yay. Thank you. Inspiring. I could continue. Okay, I've got another question for you. How would you see ways to bring together people with a mix of doing and thinking skills? And how would people who are already doing be best supported?
Important questions, and this is why these spaces are needed. I'll start by giving you a practical example. It was first of all very difficult to even talk about lived experience as knowledge, right? Not just a vulnerable identity, just as a form of knowledge. And once we've got people to recognise that that knowledge is important, I was able to work with a number of funders, and it shifted this whole kind of the deficit-based vulnerability lens of our work in our communities. And so once we start to talk about knowledge, we were able to start to work with funders like the National Lottery Community Fund, who last year and in 2018 launched the Leaders with Lived Experience Pilot Fund, which I'm delighted to say was also now launched this year in response to support leaders with lived experience during COVID. But as part of that, with a coalition of lived experience researchers, we've also been a learning partner for that fund. And what was absolutely vital learning from that was the need to have thinking time, the time to build strategies, the time to build networks across various social justice issue areas, so that we can actually strategize, move our stories to strategies, and that time requires resource. And so that I'm delighted to say that learning from lived experience leaders and their organisations actually led to that being one of the key elements of funding that would be resourced in this COVID response fund. So we need time and investment and resource to do that, thinking time. But what we also need to do is also hold those who have power, those who have funding to account. And many of us do that through research, but we also need to start to realise that we need to do some impact analysis of our work. And I think NSUN is an example of that, of not only elevating, but starting to share the sophisticated innovation that is happening with the services and products that our communities are designing, because they will be sustainable and they will have impact. But right now we don't have the research that shows the impact of our activities and our services, and that's where we also need to focus our efforts, because once we have that, we can then also redirect resource and funding to fund that work.
Amazing, thank you. And again, I'm just going to read a couple of comments here. Thinking time is mint, as are the connections and the resources to be able to do it. Baljeet, I am so moved by your words. They are so affirming and galvanizing. Thank you. Okay, we'll have time for one more question, I think. So regarding lived experience leadership, in your experience, what can be done to support those who are more likely to be deterred or not think of themselves as leaders? I'm thinking particularly for young people, and especially Black and BAME young people, working class, etc.
I think so. When the term and the concept lived experience leadership was actually crafted and framed by lived experience activists, survivors, change makers. And the reason why leadership, and I have to say thank you for raising that, because many people who share experience with the communities they're serving, often very humble folk, and leadership and the notion of leadership is something that often has an old kind of feeling of authoritarian type of image. But I think for many years, what's happened is our communities and change makers and activists have often been seen the recipients of services, or seen as informants of change through, say, focus groups, human-centered design. And actually we needed to show that those with lived experience are actually leading change, who are actually designing and innovating. And that is why the lived experience leadership frame was actually crafted. But I think that we just shouldn't get caught up in the language. What we need to start saying is we need all forms of human wisdom to craft the future we deserve and need. And that human wisdom includes lived experience, whether you're an activist, a survivor, a designer, an innovator, an entrepreneur. Because what I have, and this really important issue, and that's why I touched on the Challenge and Change Fund, is that everyone's lived and everyone has experiences, but there is not one lived experience activist, survivor, or change maker who has only had one lived experience. They are often working on the intersect of various experiences and injustices, and it's in those intersectional spaces that innovation will happen. Whether it's the intersect of racial justice and health injustice, whether it's around gender justice in the criminal justice system, it's those intersectional spaces where innovation will happen. And innovation is also a word that has often been co-opted or diluted. But actually, innovation means designing the new, but often also looking at our past to see where we've done well to bring it back to the future. So thank you so much for that question. And I think whether we're leaders, activists, survivors, change makers, I think if we talk about the human wisdom, we will start to really have traction.
Amazing, thank you so much, Baljeet. And in the last minute or two that we have left, is there anything else you'd like to say to our members?
I would just say to you all that please, that's why I want to say I appreciate you all. Please, this is such an important space to connect and also share experiences. But most importantly, let's start strategizing together and use this time, this incredible time, albeit in a virtual space, to start really exploring and thinking. And I think you're going to have some incredible sessions where you can learn and connect together, but also know that even for us as other lived experience leaders in other spaces, NSUN, you are all our brothers and sisters. And I always say I'm an adopted family member of NSUN, and it would be wonderful and incredible for all of us to connect beyond today. I know there's many NSUN members who have reached out to also become part of the lived experience leaders movement, which is just not owned by anyone. Let's just keep connecting more and more, because, and I think I'll end with one, it was Anne Beale, who was incredible NSUN member, who said to me, Baljeet, I understand what you're saying. We're doing incredible work for our communities in our own spaces, but we're like sardines in cans. Imagine if we opened up those cans and broke through those cans and all swam in the ocean together. And that's so, ending on the incredible words of a wonderful NSUN member, I want to say thank you. It's been an honor to be with you, and thank you so much for the invitation. And I so look forward to connecting with you all as we move together into the future.
Thank you so much, Baljeet, for your warmth, your wisdom, your presence. Just an honor to have you here and a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.